Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, and tonight I am very happy to welcome André Aciman for the release of his memoir, Roman Year. Let's give a hand for André. André is joined tonight by Michael David Lukas. Let's give a hand for Michael. Thank you. I'm so glad you were all here joining us this evening. This is quite special. I think you know that. I imagine there are some Aciman fans in the audience already this evening. I have a feeling that that is the case. But Michael is also local, and this is just an excellent pairing. I'm really glad to have both of them here together, and all of you in person joining us, as well as our online audience. Hello online. Thank you so kindly. We are broadcasting from San Francisco, California. We open each of our events with a land acknowledgement, and so I'd like to let you know that we are operating on unceded Ramaytush land. We believe that with acknowledgement comes action, and so we encourage you to donate either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. We have details about the Ramaytush Land Trust at the back desk if you are interested in that in particular, or interested in how to participate in this project of repatriation. Very brief business before I let these two take over. Now is a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. Thank you so kindly. Please don't take a call in the middle of the event. That's not appropriate. Please check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are currently attending. The restroom is behind me. It is available after the event, not during the event for obvious reasons. If you need to know how to get there, do let me know and I will gladly help you. We have copies of books by both of our authors at the front register. You can find them there. I will let you know that there will be no signing line tonight. All of Andre's books are signed in advance, so any copy that you pick up is already signed. You need not worry about whether it is signed or not. Michael, is it safe to assume that you would be happy to sign books as well? He's happy to sign books. So if you have been here before, you have certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the authors who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce the two writers who are joining us tonight. First, Michael David Lukas is the author of the novel The Oracle of Stamboul, which has been translated into more than a dozen languages, as well as the other novel, The Last Watchman of Old Cairo, which received the Sammy Rohr Prize, among other honors. He lives in Oakland and teaches at San Francisco State University. Go Gators. Please welcome Michael David Lukas. And last but most certainly not least, André Aciman is the author of Call Me By Your Name, Find Me, 8 White Nights, Out of Egypt, False Papers, Enigma Variations, Homo Irrealis, and the editor of the Proust Project. He teaches comparative literature at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York and lives with his wife in Manhattan. His latest book, Roman Year, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give one more hand for André.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Car. Thank you to Green Apple on the Park. This is such a lovely space, and I just feel so honored to be sitting in this seat with André Aciman talking about this beautiful book. And just want to say before I ask my first question, just what a joy it was. I read Out of Egypt maybe 10 years ago, which is the book about your family's expulsion from Alexandria and life in Alexandria and this world that was, destroyed in the 50s and 60s. And it was such a joy to return to your family. It really is, I have to say, one of my favorite families in American literature. There's just so much joy and pain and so many witty rejoinders and yeah, there's just so much going on in this family, and I was really glad to spend another 350 pages with them.
But you know that my definition of the family, what it is.
What's that?
It is the most dysfunctional unit you've ever seen on planet Earth.
Yeah, that.
If anybody does not belong, please raise your hand.
So it was just a joy to read the book and to return to that. But I think my first question is, what was it that brought you to this particular story at this particular moment in your life?
It sort of revolves around the fact that I have written many, many essays about Rome, in particular about Rome. And there have always been a different take on Rome, and this about Rome and that about Rome. Eventually, I decided that the official reason is I've written so much about Rome, I need to put it all in one book and have it sort of belong and cohere together. But that is the obvious reason. The real reason is that I never said how poor and how miserable we were when we got to Rome. Everybody thinks Rome, ergo the Colosseum, ergo, the Vatican, the museums, the art, the history, and all that was not part of what I was doing. So I finally decided, might as well be honest and admit that there was something I was very embarrassed by, or at least I hadn't resolved, and probably never will, of how suddenly poor we were, and how sort of we felt totally out of place in Italy, as out of place we felt also in Europe, and then of course in Egypt, and continue to feel out of place, at least I do, when it comes to when they ask me, what is my flag, what is my language, what is my this or that, I have no answer.
Yeah, there's so many beautiful moments of that ethos coming through.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing that really struck me was how rich this book is, and how the physical detailing is so lush and full of details. And as I was reading it, as like a sort of writer myself who has written some nonfiction, I kept being like, how is he remembering all this stuff? So I think that I just am curious, like from a craft perspective, how do you, are you making it up, or is it just going back to you? Do you have an incredible memory?
No, actually, it has to do with who are you when you're writing a book.
Yeah.
It has to do with how deep are you going to go into yourself, and how many things are you going to remember, and how many of them are you going to force yourself and basically really make an effort at coming out with not what the memory is, but what the feeling of that memory used to be. That is the part that's hard to do. And you have to go inside yourself and ask all kinds of sometimes embarrassing questions. Who was I? What did I want? Who did I think I liked? Where did I belong? Did I not like Rome? And I hated Rome initially.
Yeah.
I really did hate it. But how did I get to love it? And what about the stupid radiators? We had radiators in the apartment. They never worked. And I asked my brother, who's the only other person who would remember, because he's the only family member I have left. And I said, do you remember the termosifone? That's the name for a radiator. And he said, no, they worked. I said, no, they never worked. We had people come, and in fact, somebody just got so sick and tired of that stupid radiator that he kicked it, as if that was going to solve it, and then didn't obey, So in essence, you have to go back and remember the radiator. Remember what it felt when you put your hand on it, and it still felt cold. And you were freezing, because Rome can get very cold, and at the same time not have any heating in the house. And they had this thing, this little vase that was always attached to the radiator, because you would put water in it, and it would evaporate, so that you had some steam or some, whatever it's called, some humidity in the air, okay? Now, you put the thing in, you put water in, and it would disappear the next day, which is an allegation that there was heat, except you never saw it. So but you have to really go into there and understand the whole litany of things that went wrong in our apartment.
And that's all there in the book. But I think what I love about the book so much is like you would read a passage that was basically what you just heard, but not that that wasn't incredibly poignant what you just said, but in the book it will come around to this incredibly poignant reflection on what life is, and then you're like basically like tearing up when you're reading about these radiators.
Yeah.
Not exactly about the radiators, but
No, but the radiators can get you feeling something.
yeah, no.
What a stupid radiator! You're going to feel something for it, and yet you still do. But the point of the whole thing is that I never took notes.
Yeah.
But you have to also force yourself to remember. And some of the things that people said, I don't remember what they said, of course.
Yeah.
So you have to give them, but you have to capture their voice.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it doesn't matter. But in Out of Egypt, half the book occurs before my birth, and they're all talking away. How do I know that I haven't made that up? You don't know any longer, because in point of fact, you are quoting something that people have told you was happening, and you quote it, and then they say, which is the irony, the big irony, my God, you captured his voice. That's how he spoke. I never even heard him. Okay? So this is the writer's craft, is to essentially give life to a stupid radiator.
Yeah, and you did it beautifully. Do you mind if I ask you to read a little section?
Sure.
Can I ask you? So I'll give you a choice. You can read the sort of beginning section when you come to Rome.
Yes.
Or there's a section that I also really love that's about sort of what you're talking about on 347. That's about returning to Rome with your sons, one of whom's in the audience, and not feeling anything, going onto the street that you lived on for a year, not feeling anything, but then sort of talking about the process of writing by which that becomes something poignant and when you're excavating to...
You want me to read that one?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Okay, you just show me the passage, because you know
see.
what? And show me where I have to shut up.
You shut up whenever you want. Although your son said he was going to give you hand signals. Okay. Here, it's writing about it in my journal. At the bottom of 347.
347, okay. Writing about it in my journal, as I did later that day, would surely unnumb me. Writing would dust off things that were not there at the time of my visit, or that were there but which I wasn't quite seeing and needed time and paper to sort out, so that once written about, they'd confer on my visit the retrospective resonance that part of me had hoped to find on the street itself. Writing might even bring me closer to the street than I'd been while I lived there. Writing wouldn't alter much or exaggerate anything. It would simply excavate, which is what I was talking about. Rearrange, lace a narrative, recollect in tranquility where ordinary life is perfectly happy to nod and move on. Writing sees figures where life sees things. Things we leave behind, figures we keep. Even the experience of numbness, when traced on paper, acquires a disenchanted grace, a melancholy cadence that seems at once intimate and aroused compared with the original blah. Write about numbness, and numbness turns into something. Upset flat surfaces, dig out their shadows, and you've got dream making. Okay. I'm shutting up now. Oh, this is yours? Or?
No, that's
That's theirs.
That's
Okay.
There's so much uncertainty when you get to Rome. I mean, your family's just been forced out of Egypt. You have all these sort of like rich relatives who treat you, some treat you nicely, some treat you horribly. And I guess, what was it like to revisit that uncertainty from a moment of relative certainty. Or I'm making assumptions, but
You're making assumptions, that's certain. Because things are certain for me right now. You're right, sure. But it's okay. But the uncertainty I lived with, and it occurs in many guises in the book itself. Uncertainty because you're always scared. You're scared of what life might turn into because you've seen the worst, but it could even get worse yet. And you're also undecided about so many things. You're reluctant about things. You're basically not infatuated by anything because you can't afford to be, because you are distrusting every signal that comes your way. But at the same time, when you're writing all this, you have to get into that zone. And first of all, you don't want to, because it feels like, why would you go there? You've been there, you know it. But if you're writing a book, you also want to savor it again. But you want to savor it in such a way that you are totally bold about how painful it was. And yet at the same time, you also want to be tactful. And you want to look for the humor in that moment as well. And come up with irony so that you just don't give the facts brutally to the reader, or to myself as well. But you also, you cook it a bit, as it were. You season it. Okay, better?
yeah.
Okay? You just try to approach it in such a way that you see a bigger picture than the one that you ordinarily have. There are moments in the book when I am by myself. I hate it. There is no help. There's nothing that's going to come my way to make life better. You can't say that and just let it be there. You can allow the reader to infer the pain, but at the same time, you want to give the reader something else, which I need as well. In other words, you need to have the bigger picture, the irony. It's not comedy, it's the irony of having to be in a place that you don't like, that you must grow to like if you're going to live there. And there were times when I thought I was going to live there. And it turns out, which the biggest irony of all, is that I realized at some point that I didn't quite mind living in Italy. I didn't dislike it. I wasn't that unhappy any longer. And I had made some friends, and I was not eager to find out another country when I was already settling down in Rome. And so when my father said, "You're not going to stay," or my aunt, even worse, she would say, "You're going to an American university." And I would say, "Well, my father says that I can travel around Italy and eventually write something about Italy. You're not going to write anything." I mean, she was a tough woman, but I loved her. And, but at the same time, she forced me to apply to an American college. And at some point she said to me, and I kept saying, "I don't want to, I really like it here. I've grown to accept it." And she said, "Do you think," and this is her biggest line to me, "do you think I want you to leave? Do you think I want never to see you again? Do you think," and that's the killer for me, is that what are they going to do to you there? You're going to change. Well, gradually, thank God, I didn't change, because I remained the same idiot that she knew. But in point of fact, I had to go back and visit her a couple of times, many times actually, in order to prove to her and to show that I hadn't changed, that the boy that she knew and the young man that she knew was still very much her almost nephew. I wasn't really her nephew, but she was an aunt, and that was good enough for me.
Mm. The other sort of one of the other big themes of this year that you're writing about is, I don't want to call it a coming of age, but how old were you, 17, 18?
16, 17.
There's a real flowering of desire.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear you talk about that, but there was one thing that I kept sort of thinking about as I was reading those scenes, and I resonated a lot with it, because there's this kind of indeterminacy, right? There's all these potential objects of desire, and you call one, you talk to another, you see another in the street, and it's all sort of coming from this same fount of teenage desire, and it's inseparable from the city, right? It's on the streets, it's on the buses, I just kept thinking how sort of people's desire these days is mediated so much through the virtual world.
Okay, yeah.
And how different that is. And I wonder, I'm just curious about sort of your reflections on the desire you felt as a 16-year-old returning to that, but also how different it is from experiences.
Well, there were three things that occupied my mind. One was schoolwork, and I was a very good student because I knew that I had to be a good student because they had given us a big break in the tuition, that American school in Rome, which was managed by the Jesuits or the Brothers of the Holy Cross. And they were extremely nice to me. So, and I will always remember them with fondness. There was schoolwork. The other one was the books I was reading. I was always reading books. And I was always reading the classics. I didn't care about contemporary prose at all. These are the two things that are officially out there. Then there was one subject that I was thinking about all the time. And you can all think of what that subject is. It was constant and basically, but of course it was specific to me, not to you, because you don't think about that often, okay? But I was on my mind all the time, and I think I haven't changed, but I'm just older, that's all it is. But, and of course there were girls. Then there was a woman I was attracted to, and it was easy with her. I had also had some experiences elsewhere, which I won't go into. You have the book, take a look at it there. And of course, there was also a young man that I was also sort of interested in. Nothing happened, but at the same time, it took up some of my emotional energy, and I thought about what could have happened. But it's essentially, here I am, an exile, and learning to feel at home in Rome, and at the same time being surrounded by all these wonderful opportunities that, as a 17-year-old, I was in heaven, okay? There's no other way to put it. It was wonderful. So, but at the same time, I didn't quite allow myself to find that any of the relationships were going to be permanent. Mm-hmm. I had this sense of everything was provisional. And I think this comes from my experience in Egypt, in my experience in Italy, my experience in the United States, my experience in France. It was always provisional. And I think that I'm given to that which is provisional. I think I had that disease even before I was kicked out of Egypt. I already was provisionally Egyptian, and I didn't like it.
Mm. Well, there's also, that's an ethos that's shot through the whole book and your whole oeuvre, is there was a few moments where I felt it really strongly. One where you pick up Lawrence Durrell's Justine, and that's the moment that you start to sort of feel a longing for Alexandria.
Yes.
Or where you're in Paris watching The Leopard, and that's the moment where you realize, oh, Rome is kind of interesting and romantic. Like I can see this, and it felt that felt very familiar to me. And there's that great Basho quote, even in Kyoto. I'm yearning for Kyoto, or something like that.
You should repeat it again because it's a beautiful haiku, actually.
Even in Kyoto, I'm thinking of yearning for.
I yearn for
Kyoto.
Basically, you miss the place where you are. How could that be? Okay, and I think it's a lovely sonnet, haiku, and I couldn't resist putting it in there.
Yeah, and it really encapsulates the sort of feeling of the book.
Right.
And that feeling felt to me very literary.
Yeah.
Like this sense of always being mediated from your emotions. There was a question there. I think about like returning to the kind of pure emotions and how you can kind of dip into that and translate that.
You have to. I mean, that's the job.
Yeah.
So basically, you had an emotion. I mean, the best example I can think of is when I realized, but I cannot prove it, that my uncle was also among the many other honors that he had. He was probably a pimp. And because people would call our house and they would say, "We're looking for a secretary." And since my aunt was looking for a job, I said, they're looking for a secretary. I didn't give them any other names. Just why don't you go for an interview? And she went. And lo and behold, she realized that the man had absolutely no intention of hiring her. He had an intention to basically put his hands on her and whatever. Okay, so she immediately left and she said, "This is not working." But nevertheless, when I found out that this place was really our apartment could have been some sort of brothel, because there was no kitchen apparatus at all. Like there was only a coffee maker. And who do you make coffee for if not to keep somebody sort of waiting? And there were 2 living rooms, so it was weird. But what does my mind do? I mean, my mind being sickening and all that sort of thing. I said, "Oh my God, they must have had sex on this very bed, on my bed, the one that I slept in." So, because it was a big bed, I couldn't understand why a bed had to be so big. And so I would imagine that the person, that I would smell the smell of whatever it was, chamomile, and on the sheets, and say, "My God, that is her smell." And I just would allow myself to grope and feel something in there that was not existing, but I was almost sort of there. And eventually my mother decided that there was another soap we had to use, which was not, and so I couldn't find my imaginary partner. But to go there, to go and imagine what it must be like, what were my thoughts? How did I think of that? How did I manufacture somebody out of nothing, out of a scent of chamomile? That was, in fact, the effort. And it's a wonderful challenge when it works out. Sometimes it doesn't work out, and you erase it, or you leave it in the book for somebody to say, "This is terrible," okay? But you try to sort of arrest whatever feeling you had and try to bring it forth and sort of excavate it, as I like to say.
Yeah, I think it worked. There was something I was thinking about a lot also when I was reading, where it's, your family had a lot of money and privilege in Egypt, and a lot of the sort of tension in the story is about falling on hard times.
Yeah.
And I was thinking a lot about, like, there's something really compelling about that storyline, just in general. And I was thinking about, like, what is it about that is compelling to a reader? And I have some sort of theories about it, but I'm curious about maybe it doesn't feel like a storyline to you because you lived it. But I'm curious what it was that you were interested in sort of exploring through sort of those details.
I wanted to remember, and I needed to go back into my memory vaults and open them up and come up with what it is that I experienced during that very brief period in my life. I wasn't thinking of writing a story with a purpose. I was just writing it for myself or for some unknown reader. But usually I write for myself because I wanted to realize what it is that had occurred to me at that point. The bigger narratives are not for me. I was not interested in that. Partly because I'm a terrible, as you all know, I'm a terrible plot writer. I don't like plots because I don't understand plots. The good thing about a memoir is that the plot is given to you. You know what happened in your life, and you know exactly how you got out of it, if you got out of it, and if you sort of stayed in it, then you stayed in it. But I don't have a real good answer to that question that you asked.
Fair enough. Um,
That's what the examiner says. Fair enough. Okay.
I mean, if you don't mind me throwing out my idea, I sort of had this sense that like you and your mom and your brother were really like discovering who you truly were, and there was so much generosity with like your neighbors, and there's such a wonderful feeling in the house that I think was really present in Out of Egypt also, like this feeling of hosting people and bringing people in and laughing and having a good time, and that was present, whether there was money or not.
That's true. Yeah.
And that was something that was sort of poignant to me about that aspect of it.
Yeah, there was. I mean, just to add to this is that my mother has, I don't know how she did it, but many of the people she met in the marketplace were people who were also deaf and mute as she was. And she would recognize right away, and she would go up to them and talk to them and become friendly with them. So that suddenly we had people coming over for tea, which is something that does not exist on Via Clelia. People don't have tea. But that was what she did, and she offered tea, and they came with biscuits or basically bread. A woman who had a stall in the marketplace would come and deliver bread because her daughter would come all the time to our house in order to get shots so that she could be more robust because she was very, very skinny.
What kind of shots were those? I was kind of curious.
I don't know. There were shots. My mother gave shots because my mother was trained during World War II, and so she knew how to give shots, and she was give good shots. I don't know. But and so this girl was there, and she was clearly attracted to me. And I just could not be attracted to her. There was no way I was ever going to be attracted to her. My mother wanted us to do something with her, No, she's a good girl, okay?
There's I don't think this is a spoiler, but there's a moment in the end. I should say I hate it when people don't respond to my emails. There's a moment at the end where you don't respond to her letter.
Yes.
And I thought it was one of the most sympathetic portraits of someone not responding to an email or letter, and it really gave me a lot of sort of. I started to understand that point of view of just the non-response. It was very beautiful.
You don't mean not to respond, because she sent me the letter with a cassette of a song that I loved. I loved as a consequence, and she knew that I was going to love it because it reminded us of the songs that she used to listen to and played on my record player at home. But as you know, sometimes you get a wonderful email and you plan to answer it, and then you say, no, but I want to write a long email in reply to this. And you keep postponing to the point where it's just too late, and you accept the fact that you're never going to postpone it, and you feel terrible. But it also allowed me to finish the book with that song, which is absolutely lovely.
And yeah, it's worth it. Hopefully, in my imagination, she is reading your book and has a warm feeling.
I hope she reads my book. I've changed all the names, of course, but she might recognize herself.
I think she would recognize herself.
Oh, God.
In a good way. So we only have a little bit left before the audience Q&A, so start thinking of your questions. But I imagine there's a lot of Call Me By Your Name fans out there in the audience. So if you don't mind me asking you a question about that, I thought about, I'm sure you get a lot of questions about that.
About Call Me By Your Name?
Yeah.
No, never.
So I wanted to ask a question that is a quintessentially André Aciman question about the book and the movie. I'm curious. I was rewatching the movie recently, and I was struck by You know that I forget who said it, but there's this writer who watched a movie of his book and said it was like watching his mother being murdered on screen or something like that.
Yeah.
And but Call Me by Your Name is such a beautiful, tender, well done movie. So like, what's it like to write such a thoughtful, beautiful, pensive, luscious book, and then have this beautiful, pensive, luscious movie made of it? How does that change your relationship to the book and wherever it came from?
No, actually, it did not change my relationship to the book. I happen to be one of those few writers who actually like the movie that's drawn from their book.
Yeah.
Because they did a very, very good and cautious adaptation of the book, to the point where the whole father scene is
Yeah.
it was almost word for word reproduction of what I had said.
Yeah.
And there were some minor changes. One of the chapters on Rome, for example, does not take place at all in Rome, and an extract of it happens to be portrayed in Bergamo, which is a city close by Crema. I wasn't. No, I liked the movie. I did like the movie. I was asked at the time to come into the set because I wanted to see what was going on. I mean, gee, I'm inspecting this, okay? I wasn't inspecting. I just wanted to know what was happening. And so I got there, and the next thing I know is that I am asked, do you mind acting in this part? I said, which part is that? And they said, one of the gay guys. And I said, who's my partner? Because I knew there were two of them. I said, he's the producer of the movie, and he's basically, they couldn't find any other actors, so they asked me and the producer of the movie to basically be like partners. They dressed us almost the same. We looked totally ridiculous, but the point of the whole thing is that I wanted, when I was writing the book, I wanted there to be an amazing love between Elio and Oliver, and at the same time, I wanted to show downstairs on the same day that there are some canonical gay couples that are basically what is it? The father says something that I didn't write, but is it because they're gay or is it because they're ridiculous? And that I did not write that, but it was a wonderful moment in the movie, and I thought, okay, so I'll act in it and I'll do. I didn't know that it was going to become this successful as a movie.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I even thought when I submitted the manuscript that the agent was going to be so embarrassed by it. That there's a peach scene, okay? Okay, so I'm just saying, come on, what are you doing, okay? But she called me the next day, Justin, and I'll never forget this. The next day she said, do you want me to sell this? I said, can you actually sell this? Oh, she said, oh, yes. So she had read it overnight and had basically thought about it and was resolved to act really fast on it.
Wow.
And so, but did I know any of this? I didn't. And just to add one further thought, a lot of people, a lot of young men and young women use my book as a kind of Bible itinerary for how to come out to their parents. And I had no idea this was going to happen. Because that's the last thing I can do is to make a mission statement in my book. There's ever been a mission statement in any of the things I write.
Yeah.
So, but there it is. I think the parents, as you all know, the parents know. They already know. They're not stupid. And they basically, they are, in fact, if the kid is not going to speak about it, they're going to speak about it. And that's what happens in the book.
Yeah, yeah. Going on Reddit threads about the book and the movies, I mean, I got really deep. There's a lot of material out there on the internet about it.
Oh, please, I know that.
But I think something that was striking to me about this book, I mean, just to sort of bring it back, or what's striking to me about your career in general, is that you have so many disparate things that, like, you're this guy, you're this guy, you're that guy, the Proust guy, the, like, Out of Egypt guy, which are all very different books, and yet they all sort of come together with a certain ethos. But I feel like this book, to give a nice little pitch for it, feels like the kind of like cornerstone of the Aciman universe in a way. Like it contains all these different elements that might feel disparate,
Yeah.
but they actually kind of come together in a way in this book.
I think it's true. It is true. I don't resolve anything,
No.
but they cohere.
Yeah.
And all the aspects of my life that I've had many aspects to my life, as some of you know. It's just it's very hard to let everything belong together. And I wanted to write this book because I think that my 16, 17-year-old period was formative enough that it allowed me to see who I was and who I have remained.
Yeah.
And so that was, for me, essential.
Well, it's wonderful. After we have a few questions from the audience, you should all go buy a signed copy.
Isn't he great about that?
So, does anyone have any questions? And yeah, right here in front.
Given the context of your family being exiled from Egypt and Jewishness makes just a big recurring theme in your works, how has your relationship with Judaism and being Jewish changed over the years, and especially as a youth and now, and maybe anti-Semitism that you faced, or just because I've seen it and I've also experienced it with Kurdistan, but yeah.
Well, first of all, I was very lucky. Some people don't consider it luck, but I was very lucky that I grew up in a household that was completely laïc. In other words, there was no religion at all, no talk about God, nothing existed. We celebrated Christmas and we celebrated Easter. My other relatives, my more distant and elderly relatives, celebrated Passover in the typical sort of Seder that lasts hours and hours and can be deadly. I have no experience of Judaism at all. I hate anti-Semitism because I've seen it, I've lived it, and I spot it right away. Yes, I can become paranoid and see it where it's not. However, there were times in my life where I felt that being a Jew was not advantageous. And there were times when I even thought, maybe we should be Christians instead. This is ridiculous. We have too many enemies, and we've had too many enemies for the past 5,000 years or whatever. So, and then, of course, I had the countervailing thought, which is part of who I am, always the countervailing thought. If I am Christian, as I want to be, what happens to the part of me that wants to be Jewish? No, I have to remain Jewish, but I cannot be Christian. But that is not a good reason not to want to be Jewish. It basically is by sort of opposition to what I had opposed to being Jewish that drove me to accept the fact that I'm Jewish. But it is a very timid and very tame acceptance of my Judaism. I never had a bar mitzvah. That never occurred. That was not to be discussed, which I consider that very lucky. But some people do not. I know that. Yes.
I'm curious about your thoughts on the narrativization of memory. In my experience about writing directly from memory, there's a funny thing that happens where the memory very quickly becomes a fiction of its own.
Yes.
And I wonder if you feel, I'm sure you've thought about it, but I'm curious how you feel about that transition memory's never truth, obviously, but where the memory goes to or where the narrative shifts to. It's obviously been so long since you've lived the contents of this book. Do you worry at all that you've, in a sense, written over your own true experience, or that what you've written becomes more true or more emotionally present?
I think you're right. What I have done is essentially, I try to go back to the past.
Yeah.
But I do know, and I've said this to many of my students, if you add a comma and you put it in the wrong place, you've changed the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You've changed, but you haven't changed the truth. I'm sorry, I take it back. You've changed reality. Truth is somewhere else. And I think that is where I think a writer wants to dig. You want the truth to come out. You don't want the real. The real is immaterial, because, and as I say in that chapter that I've written, I forget what the words I had, but the figure is what I want. It's not the real event that matters to me, and that for me has always been a guiding thing. So you're right. The memory becomes novelized, or it becomes novelistic, or it becomes literary, which is fine as long as you're not lying. You're okay.
Yeah.
You just are. You're excavating means that you are in the act of bringing something out that has not been available to you before, and you might ruin something, or you might find that you've broken a part of a statue, whatever that was there, or there are crumbs now. But you want to put the crumbs back. And that's what my job is, I think, is in making sure that the comma is in the right spot. Even if it means that it was never there initially, but it makes for a better truth to you. And I think that is the experience that I've had when you call me by your name, is that a lot of the facts are not facts at all. They're not real, but they become real by virtue of having been told in a particular way.
I have a question.
Sure.
So when one of your books becomes a movie or a miniseries, so how do you maintain the integrity of your storyline? Is it in a contract, or you mentioned for Call Me By Your Name that you were actually there on set?
Yeah, but for 3 days.
For 3 days,
Okay.
yeah. So how do you make sure that it's like quality control? How do
No, you don't.
oversee?
You have no say. You should have no say. If an author intrudes on the making of the film, he is a terrible participant. You don't. You have to accept the fact that the people making the film are changing your book. They're going to have to, and that's unavoidable. So in many respects, I find that I was lucky because they changed quite a bit, but not the significant parts. For example, the scene where Elio and Oliver are essentially confiding in their attraction to each other. I saw that being filmed as I was arriving on the set. And for me, it was a very, very significant moment, because it was a scene that mattered, because in it, Elio does not say a word about his feelings, does not say anything, but he allows the other person to infer that he has feelings for him, that he's attracted to him, that he might even be in love with him, but he doesn't say any of that. And so the fact is, I remember the words. I almost remember the words. It's something like, Elio says, the Battle of the Piave was disastrous for the Italians. Too many people died. And Oliver will say, do you know everything? And Elio replies, I know nothing. I know nothing about what really matters. What matters? Oh, I don't know. That sort of conversation was maintained in the movie itself. And I love that. In other words, they didn't alter anything that mattered to me. Yeah.
So when you were a boy, you liked to read the classics. What sorts of books really move you now?
Oh God. I I hate to say this, the classics.
Yeah.
I don't read many contemporary authors. When I do, I mean, Claire Keegan, for example, well, I was advised to read her, and I adored what she wrote. But I loved Amor Towles' book on the gentleman in Moscow. I thought that was a terrific book. But I don't read, and it's terrific because it has a lineage behind it. You can tell that this is a man who's been brought up with the classics. He knows the classics. The ethos of the book reflects the classics. So, in many ways, I sort of go back to the classics. I've reread many books that I had read when I was 16, 17 in Italy, and I still like them. And one of my favorites is by Dostoevsky, and it's not Crime and Punishment, though I read that many times. It is the book called The Idiot. Why? Because in many respects, I have been doing the same thing that the idiot does. Basically, always in the wrong place, always saying the wrong thing, always missing the moment, and that's my sort of, what do you call it, my bread and butter of daily life. It's that I missed the moment. And to the point where I decided to write a whole book on not the present tense, but the conditional mood. Because in the conditional, I understand everything. I know from the conditional, as they say. The present tense, not in my life. Yes?
Why do you think we fall in love with strangers? Speaking of Homo Irrealis, you have an essay on In Freud's Shadow, and there's a little bit of a scene on the 85 bus.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and so I was on the streets of Leiden studying some papyri at the Rijksmuseum.
Okay.
And I saw someone at a coffee shop reading this book.
Okay.
I couldn't help myself. I said, oh, I love him. He's a great author. She said, oh, come back in 15 minutes. You can have this book. And she wrote me a little bit of a love letter.
Oh.
How do we fall in love with strangers like this?
Well, how do we, or why do we, or we do in life. I don't know if it's love. That's a word that I avoid and have frequently avoided in stories about two people desiring each other like crazy. But I don't like the word love because it's so emphatic that you suddenly realize that, oh God, it's love. Okay, you've said it all. There's nothing new coming up. So, but how do we fall in love, and why do we fall in love with people? By virtue of just a series of unintended accidents. That's the most beautiful thing in life, isn't it? When the accident turns out to be almost scripted, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the beauty of any event in life. When the thing that you said, that's never going to happen, it just happens, and it is fantastic, and you love it, and you say, it was never meant to happen. It was by mistake that it occurred, but it does. And it's the times when things are planned, when you plan things, and they don't always work. It's the accidents. I find that the accidents in my life have been terrific, have been wonderful.
Thank you.
No.
Last question.
This person?
Okay, I'll ask one question. So you loved your Aunt Flora,
Yes.
who towards the end of the book says, and you have it in italics, look for the human.
Yes. Look for the human is something that has stayed with me all my life. She taught it to me. Look for the human. In other words, don't go for the big ideas, the big jargon, the big explanations that people come up with things. Look for what is very basic. And the way I say it, and I say it to all my graduate students who are studying comparative literature, I say, don't look for the grand explanations. Look for the ones that a child of 7, 8, or 9 would have understood, but wouldn't have had the the words for it. That's who you're reacting anyway to when you read a great book. You're not reacting because you saw the genius of this person, blah, blah, blah. You just felt something very powerful that made sense to you. And that eventually it just was human emotion. And the great books are, I teach literature to graduate students, and I know what they want to do. But when they read I teach a whole seminar on Marcel Proust, they understand that I say, don't give me those big ideas. Those are fantastic ideas, but they're irrelevant. Tell me what you felt and what is only specific to you and no one else. And that is the thing that I insist on when I speak to a graduate student, is tell me what hit you and where did you basically sort of bond with this book or with this character or with this whatever it is. It's always, and so my aunt would say, look for the human. And I always say this, look for the basic human factor, nothing else. Thanks. You had a question?
I did, yeah. I had a question on writing memoir and writing nonfiction. I think this is something that I've noticed a lot of nonfiction writers, at least in my graduate program, struggle with, is, writing your truth, or like writing your experience while like the people in your narrative are still around you and part of your life. And like, how do you write memoir and like let yourself write memoir without the fear of someone else, the fear of other people that you care about being hurt by it?
That's I can only answer with just do it, because you cannot chasten yourself, you cannot censor yourself. If you do that, you're writing a false narrative. I think that, I wrote about my parents, for example. I wrote about them very honestly. They never got along in the many years they lived together. And they lived together for almost 60 years. Okay? They never had a moment of rest between them. Or a moment of, they may have been sort of attracted to each other at some point, but that went away, right away. And I said that my mother was deaf. And I said that my father was basically a philanderer. And when I said, and my uncle said, when another uncle said, you shouldn't have said that she was deaf. That wasn't true. or the other one is that, and I asked my father, do you mind if I say that you philandered, that you were sleeping around the whole town of Alexandria? He said, no, it's the truth, say it. So, and there are many other things that could go wrong. Like if somebody is, if you're going to hurt somebody, you might want to soften it, or you might not write about them. But if your role in the story is to tell the truth and out the truth, if somebody did something to you that you hated, and that affected you and never left, you might want to say that. Because writing is, in fact, you're not... Writing is sacrosanct, that you don't lie in writing. And so you have to have the boldness to say everything. And I've used those words, I use them all the time. You have to be extremely bold, and at the same time you have to be extremely tactful. Because the two go together. Okay. Thank you.
Can we give one more hand for André Aciman? Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you both. Michael, thank you for
My pleasure.
thank you for joining us and for reading so closely and coming up with this great
I'm reading it very closely.
André, thank you for writing this book and sharing it.
Thank you so much.
I am just here to let you know that we have copies of books by both of our authors at the front register. You can find them there. Please do remember that Andre's books are already signed, so you need not worry about that. If you would like Michael to sign his books, please do ask him. He would be happy to. Take a look around. Make yourselves comfortable. If you have any questions, let me know. And if not, we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.